Hello and welcome, Padawans. I'm Joe. Here with me is my co-host, Master Dan.
Hello and greetings.
And we are beginning a new program here on the Knights of Kreia, which will hopefully earmark an era when we're paying a bit more attention to this channel. We will, however, be continuing with our fan fiction soon enough. Never fear. I have to reassure all of our millions of fans of that video series of that. But this will be our analysis of each of the Star Wars movies as we go along. And when I say each, I mean the real Star Wars movies, because come on, the sequels aren't actually Star Wars. They're just fan fiction. Really bad fan fiction.
Worthy of the dark side.
Yeah. Well, it's been said by someone, not in these words, but along these lines, that evil cannot create
It can only destroy.
and pervert what's already come before. That was more in reference to Melkor from Lord of the Rings. Seriously, go check out our Lord of the Rings channel. You'll love it. Brothers Arda. Anyways, also don't forget to smash the subscribe button here. But anyways, Star Wars Episode 1 was a film that, when it came out, was extremely popular. Everybody loved it. And I do mean everybody. Jeez, the lineups for this movie were just insane. Where we came from, they were going all across the street in several, almost like 2-3 blocks. It was insane. And you couldn't actually drive by that part of town, which was the main part of downtown. So it was a phenomenon. In some ways comparable to 1977. The difference was this is a better movie than Episode 4. And yes, I went there. I love Episode 4, but Episode 1 is arguably a better movie, objectively speaking. And before you go, oh, dislike, how dare you? Yeah, I don't care what you think. I know this is a better movie. And the fact of the matter is that the acting in this film is better. The costume set is better. The production design is better. And not everything was shot in green screen. That's an old myth that was spawned by someone. I don't know who, but I have my suspicions. And the reality is that ever since these movies came out, the mainstream media was jealous, and so were other filmmakers. They were all jealous of George's vision, and so they basically went on a campaign against this film. And this is not a conspiracy theory. This is what happened.
It's slanderous.
Yeah. You look at shows like House MD, which constantly made reference to how bad the prequels are. When, let's be honest, House MD was trash. It was soap opera trash. And it was bad-mouthing the prequels. It's just laughable. But anyways, the truth is the original movies were okay-ish at best. Episode 4 was really good, but the other two were at best okay. And the prequels were really the masterpieces. So now that we have the disclaimers aside, don't forget to smash the subscribe button. Even if you're some buffoon who intends to dislike every video, do remember to subscribe, because a hate crush is still a crush, and we don't mind if you crush on our channel. Especially if the crushing in question involves crushing the subscribe button. Anyways, that's enough trolling. But the movie starts off with the words in the stars, which is always how George started his Star Wars films. By this time, it was already a bit of a trope, but this is not something that one should heap any kind of disfavor towards, as George is abiding by something he set in motion with Episode 4, and he kept to with the other movies. And the words in the sky thing here is meant to introduce the situation, the scenario. And it's used to good effect. It's basically the narration of sorts. Okay, this is the events of our Flash Gordon-esque universe where we're at in it. In this case, what I love is also that the video games pay homage to this sort of thing and use the words in the sky as well. This is something that is done continuously in each of them, from the Jedi Knight series to the KOTOR duology to Battlefront. Like, they all do this. Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. Turmoil has engulfed the Galactic Republic. The taxation of trade routes to outlying star systems is in dispute. Now, narratively, this introduces the fact that the Galactic Republic has begun to regulate trade routes, regulating small and larger businesses. And we all know what this will mean. This will actually impoverish a good chunk of the galaxy, especially the mid-rim, which is already feeling the crunch because, well, to be quite honest, this is where most of the trade routes are. This is essentially the core punishing the mid-rim, because most traffic has to go through mid-rim, that is to say, outer rim with all the raw goods and whatnot, and mid-rim also with all the raw goods. And this is, to an extent, the core, like I said, lashing out and striking at the mid-rim, which depends on these trade routes.
And just this paragraph alone, we see, okay, the general setting, we now know what's going on, what's leading into things.
Yeah, because we're also seeing how this is a piece of regulation that would not be popular anywhere, whether in the real world or otherwise. And that's because this is going to be essentially the rich taxing the poor, when it's the poor who depend on these trade routes to get their goods, get their food, and get their medical supplies. The rich don't have to worry as much. They could probably bypass it. Now, I don't like the Trade Federation, but the truth of the matter was this piece of regulation is cruel and unneeded. It is very unnecessary. It, in a way, to my mind, harkens back to that scene in Dragonheart when Bowen comments, "It's a free road unless the king has started to tax it." At which point the local baron gets it in his head, oh, a road tax. But who uses the road? Well, pilgrims, priests, and peasants. So you're going to tax, and merchants. And you're going to tax people who are providing a service to society for providing that service. It's totally unnecessary. Hoping to resolve the matter with a blockade of deadly battleships, the greedy Trade Federation has stopped all shipping to the small planet of Naboo. Right here, we've got some might say an overreaction, but to an extent, it's not, because they're retaliating. The Republic has taken a shot across the bow at the Trade Federation, which depends on the trade routes of the mid-rim. They've made their fortune in the mid-rim. Now, this is not to say that the Trade Federation is a good corporation. It's a corporation, so it's automatically bad for the most part. And I only take that attitude towards big corporations because they do very little of good in the world for the most part. Some of them do provide some good services and aren't that bad. But the truth of the matter is, corporations are an unliving thing and thus incapable of morality to a large extent. And the Trade Federation is the very image of this philosophy. But in turn, Palpatine issued out this piece of legislature, and then as Darth Sidious, he went and told the Trade Federation to strike at Naboo. And what this is going to do is create a scenario in which the Nabooans will have to turn to their senator and say, help us resolve this problem. And he will then, basically he's creating a false crisis, whereupon he will use it to elevate himself to the office of Supreme Chancellor. And the trouble is that Naboo as a planet is insignificant in galactic affairs. But this has also elevated it in terms of galactic importance, because now it's the focus of attention. And Sidious deliberately chose his own homeworld, which is rather cruel because it shows a lack of nationalism and loyalty to his people, because the only reason I say that these are virtues is that if you cannot love your own people, you cannot love anyone.
So now we have the setting. We had the setting, now we have the inciting action.
Yeah. While the Congress of the Republic endlessly debates the alarming chain of events, the Supreme Chancellor has secretly dispatched 2 Jedi Knights, the guardians of peace and justice in the galaxy, to settle the conflict. Yeah. I don't think it requires too much analysis here, because the truth is, this is exactly what it says. The movie starts proper with a team of Jedi Knights seeking permission to land and being granted permission to land in the Trade Federation battleship, which this is going to set off a chain of events that will change the whole of the galaxy. Lore-wise, the 2 characters in question, the 2 Jedi Knights, are Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan Kenobi, as we all know. Qui-Gon Jinn is a 60-year-old or so Jedi Master, quite past his prime, and a man who's had a difficult life, to say the least. He's been a so-so master to Obi-Wan Kenobi. Now, I know there's this myth that he was the perfect master, but in the books, you see that he's mediocre as a teacher. In a lot of ways, he had moments where do as I say, not as I do. He was sometimes manipulative, sometimes inadvertently neglectful of Obi-Wan. There were times when he was actually the very worst of masters, other times the very greatest of teachers. He was a man who was teaching, but learning through trial and error. And the truth of the matter was, in some ways this makes him a great teacher, but in other ways a bad one. It's a mixed affair, and there's a lot of nuance to his style of teaching. And, for example, you had books such as Legacy of the Jedi, where he's the very best of teachers, far better than his own master, Dooku, who was actively abusive towards him. And yet you had books such as a good chunk of the Jedi Apprentice series, a good chunk of it, such as the 9th book, even the 11th, 12th, and 13th, where he is just such a stellar teacher. But then you have some other books such as Secrets of the Jedi, where he is not very good. But there's also the fact that it's even referenced to an extent in Legacy of the Jedi, now that I think about it. The thing is, there was a bit of an infantilization process on Obi-Wan's end, where Obi-Wan after the age of 15 or so, would have to take up the role of the parent, in a way, for his own father figure. Because when Tal died, Qui-Gon Jinn was broken for a long while. And Obi-Wan, as a teenager, had to parent his own parent and nurture him. And in turn, he also kept secret his master's relationship for a time, to a large extent. It was a semi-emotional affair between Qui-Gon and Tal. Obi-Wan kept secret about it, because you don't want your master kicked out of the order. But then when the time came to keep Obi-Wan's relationship secret, Qui-Gon exposed him and threatened to kick him out, unless he broke up the affair. And then Yoda, meanwhile, basically manipulated Siri into breaking up with Obi-Wan, which served to depress Obi-Wan, and suitably break him so that he could be remolded into the perfect Jedi again. This happened when Obi-Wan was 18. So, and the trouble is that when it comes to crushes and young love, Obi-Wan was sometimes susceptible to it, but as I said, the love of his life was Sili Tachi, and Qui-Gon was not very supportive of that relationship. Sili had a personality more like Anakin, and so her and Qui-Gon didn't fully get along. And arguably, Qui-Gon would not have gotten along with young man Anakin at all, given the personality differences. But on the other hand, Obi-Wan, who is 25, and really out to have been a Jedi Knight for about 7 years by now, given that at 18 he was already a powerhouse as a Jedi, has clung on to his master's skirts simply out of emotional dependence. So the trouble is that while Obi-Wan comes off as arrogant in this movie at a few points, such as the pathetic life forms idea, he's really a vulnerable young man who's been left with nothing other than Qui-Gon. And arguably Qui-Gon does do him a favor when trying to force him out of the nest, because Obi-Wan should have already left years ago, but he hasn't. It's unhealthy of Obi-Wan to stay. So this is the setting at the beginning of the film. There's tension between the two men. Obi-Wan has had to step into the role of father for his own father. The father has kind of been a terrible father-in-law, but at the same time, there can be no disputing the love between the two. And another thing that has to be discussed is the fact that when Qui-Gon lost a lover, Obi-Wan lost a mother. This is something not many Star Wars fans think about, but Obi-Wan's mother figure was tall. She always championed Obi-Wan, always loved him, always forgave him, and Obi-Wan always revered her and adored her. In some ways, she was closer to Obi-Wan than Qui-Gon. And this adds an extra element to the relationship. It's a very complicated relationship, so anyone who's looking at the movie and saying it's just a simple father-son bond and there's nothing more to it, no. It's endlessly nuanced and complicated. There's resentments, there's love, there's shared secrets, there's been arguments. Actually, in some ways, this is the most mature and interesting father-son relationship in all of Star Wars history, after maybe the Morgan and Kyle Katarn relationship.
So here we see two flawed individuals. Neither are perfect. They've made a lot of mistakes, and now they're thrust into
having to bear the burden of the galaxy on their shoulders. But on the other hand, I'm not saying all this to bash Qui-Gon Jinn or Obi-Wan Kenobi as characters. I think they're wonderful characters. And I think deep down the two characters represent core values of good. Qui-Gon deep down is a good father who loves his son. He's made his mistakes. He's now trying to correct them. He's trying to tell his kid, it's time now. You're a grown man. Go make your own destiny. I needed you for a while, but it's time for you to leave the nest. I'm ready for you to go, leave home. I wasn't ready years ago. I should have been, but I wasn't. It's time for you to go now. While Obi-Wan is in a state where he knows he needs to leave the nest, but a part of him has become codependent. But ultimately, the nuance and the tragedies and all that they've overcome together makes the two characters even more beautiful. I really love these two characters, and I hope you're not discouraged too much by our rambling and explanation of the relationship and the nature of these two characters. These two characters who are easily two of the most complex sci-fi characters of all times, and easily two of the most interesting. You could write an entire novel series or a set of movies just about one of them, but you put both of them on the same screen together, and you have cinematic gold, which is exactly what George gave everyone in this near perfect film. So if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to slash at the like and subscribe buttons as though you were Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan cutting down Darth Maul.